When you think of socialism, the United States is hardly the first country that comes to mind. But in recent years, socialism is becoming a matter of heated political debate in the U.S.
Look, we're not going to be a socialist nation. We're not going to have a socialist president, especially a female socialist president. We're not going to have it.
They may hate democratic socialism because it benefits working people, but they absolutely love corporate socialism that enriches Trump and other billionaires.
It will take the average American worker more than 3.7 million years to earn the wealth equivalent to the richest man in the country. The top 1% of families in the U.S. earned on average 26.3 times as much income as the bottom 99%. America's richest 1% hasn't had this much wealth since before the Great Depression, and this extreme income inequality is fueling the debate about economic rights in the U.S. In a year suffering from a pandemic, 1 in 4 American households have experienced job loss or diminished income, and millions are at the brink of losing their homes. The unprecedented health emergency has forced the U.S. into emergency socialism. The coronavirus outbreak has prompted the biggest economic roll for the U.S. government since World War II. Congress has approved nearly $3 trillion in emergency relief early this year, and it's still discussing more economic aid packages. The federal government is also playing a greater role in healthcare, providing grants for hospitals to pay for COVID-19 patients who lack insurance. In March, President Trump invoked the Defense Production Act to compel companies to manufacture items in short supply, such as ventilators, and to limit exports of medical goods. Even before the pandemic, the U.S. had some social welfare programs that provide food, housing, and medical aid to people in distress. Yet calls for bigger economic reforms like establishing annual taxes on extreme wealth and establishing universal health care have been labeled as socialist by many Republicans and also by President Donald Trump.
Here in the United States, we are alarmed by the new calls to adopt socialism in our country. America was founded on liberty and independence, and not government coercion, domination, and control. We are born free, and we will stay free.
But do Americans really know what socialism is, and has the coronavirus crisis shown that America needs more of it? First, let's start by defining socialism. Socialism is a political and economic theory that advocates for public ownership and administration of the means of production and distribution of goods where profits are distributed proportionally. Modern-day socialism was born in response to the exploitation of workers during the Industrial Revolution in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Workers were expected to work for long hours under dangerous conditions with little rights and profits, while industrialists amassed huge amounts of wealth. Socialist movements around the world helped improve workers' conditions and helped set laws that protect worker rights. But the democratic socialism that many progressive Democrats are calling for today in the U.S. falls between capitalism and socialism. They are calling for a system that preserves capitalism but with stricter regulations and heavier taxes on the rich and more free public services for the poor. When U.S. politicians who advocate for such an economic vision are asked about the meaning of democratic socialism, they often give a pragmatic answer to which policies need to be set.
Both of you identify as democratic socialists. What does that mean?
Well, I think it means, among other things, that if you work 40 hours a week in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, you should be earning a living wage, $15 an hour. That's what it means.
Critics of socialism in the U.S. point to Venezuela as an example of socialism's failure, while people with positive views of socialism cite European democracies such as Finland and Denmark as places where forms of democratic socialism have worked within a free market economy.
Now let's look at the facts about socialism, shall we? Venezuela, a rich country blessed with bountiful natural resources, is now a hellhole. Look what its experiment with socialism has wrought.
The perception that socialism can bring an end to the country's wealth has been long engraved in American political rhetoric, and socialism is often confused with communism.
But most people don't understand that. They also identify socialism with communism. They are not sure what the difference is between them. Communism, of course, means authoritarianism and forcing people to adopt and keep a certain system, as in the Soviet Union, as that was the principle.
Capitalism in the U.S. has been historically linked to the American dream, a belief that anyone, regardless of where they were born, can attain their own version of success in a society where upward mobility is possible for everyone through hard work and perseverance, from rags to riches.
The American dream is a song of hope that rings through night, winter air, vivid, tender music that warms our hearts when the least among us aspire to the greatest things.
But today this vision is questioned more than ever. Is the American dream lost? Data shows that social mobility has stagnated over the past decades in the U.S. Millennials are the first generation in a long time who expect to be poorer than their parents. The young generation cannot afford to own houses like their parents did. They have thousands of dollars in college debt and are having fewer economic opportunities to climb the social ladder. This graph shows a fraction of children earning more than their parents by birth year. If you were born in the 1940s in the US, you have a more than 90% chance of making more than your parents. But if you were born after the 1980s, your chances of making more money than your parents is 50%. It is a growing gap between the old and young, the rich and the poor, and also between black and white workers. According to the Washington Post, in 1863, black Americans owned 0.5% of the national wealth, and in 2019, it was just over 1.5%. In 2020, black home ownership is at its lowest since 1968, the year Jim Crow segregation laws were abolished. Only 41% of black Americans own homes as of 2019 compared to 75% of whites. This economic climate is driving more young people to support socialism according to polls and more than any other age group. This age divide is even reflected among party lines.
The federal tipped minimum wage is $2.13 an hour. That is unacceptable. Any job that pays $2.13 an hour is not a job. It's indentured servitude.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a former organizer for Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign and a bartender in New York, unseated a powerful 10-term New York congressman to become the youngest person in Congress in 2018 at the age of 28. Her victory against Joe Crowley, the Democratic Party's most senior congressman, came as a shock to the party's elite. Crowley, once the Democratic Party favorite to replace Nancy Pelosi as House Speaker, was one of the party's establishment figures. Her win was dubbed by media as a working-class takeover of the Democratic Party. In her campaign, Ocasio-Cortez accused Crowley of being out of touch with the problems of the working-class people in his district, labeling him as corporate Democrat for his ties to Wall Street. The young congresswoman has since won a second term in 2020.
We are here in a generational fight to guarantee health care to all people in this country.
The term socialism was still hostage to its historical link to the Soviet Union in mainstream America, but then came Bernie Sanders' 2016 candidacy.
Our revolution continues.
Although Bernie was defeated in his 2016 and 2020 campaigns, he did succeed in having democratic socialism gain momentum and nudged more Democrats towards the left. All Democratic candidates in the 2020 elections endorsed Medicare for all, and almost all candidates supported raising the minimum wage to $15 per hour. Just in 2016, the $15 per hour federal wage was too drastic for some Democrats. Hillary Clinton called for a $12 federal wage with options for states to go higher when she ran for president.
What I have been trying to do, what Alexandria is trying to do, is to transform the Democratic Party so that they open their doors to young people and working people and becoming a party of ordinary Americans, not just big money interests.
Michael Kazin, an American historian who is writing a book on the history of the Democratic Party, wrote for the New York Times that Sanders has already transformed the Democratic Party.
Yet even in defeat, the first self-declared socialist in American history to have a realistic chance at both prizes is likely to achieve a different kind of victory, one few actual presidents ever have, transforming the ideology and program of a major party.
But not everyone has moved above socialism's historical association.
If Democrats want to bring socialism to America, it makes me wonder, do they want to destroy America?
According to polls, the majority of Americans are in favor of a national health plan and free college tuition fees, but far fewer are comfortable supporting a socialist candidate. In fact, many Americans approve social programs that help the working class, but not when these reforms are presented under a socialist tag. According to a 2019 Pew Research finding, 65% of Americans have a positive impression of capitalism compared to 42% of socialism. The same poll shows that there is a big partisan divide in opinions about socialism. 8 out of 10 Republicans have a negative impression of socialism, while nearly 2/3 of Democrats have a positive view of socialism. In Texas, which leans Republican, many view socialism as a threat to economic freedoms.
I would not vote for a socialist candidate, no, or someone who introduced socialist policies. Just think capitalism is too important to what we're used to, and I feel like people are just not ready to be that, I don't know if the right word is sharing, but to be taxed at those rates and just buy into something that sort of goes against what I think most people perceive as free enterprise.
The idea that socialism is a system that restrains upward mobility is a belief shared by many Americans.
But basically, socialism is seen as something where you give everybody the same thing, and you have everybody getting the same thing, and nobody gets ahead of anybody else. And in America, most people think that someday they will be rich. No matter how unrealistic that is, you can hear them saying, well, if I live long enough and work hard enough, I'll be rich someday, which is unrealistic, but that's what people think.
Socialism was historically weaponized in the U.S. during 2 periods of heightened tensions with Russia, marked by fear that communism would come to the United States. The first Red Scare period was following the Bolshevik Russian Revolution of 1917, which inspired a wave of communist revolutions in many countries around the world. The second Red Scare period was after World War II during the Cold War with Russia. Concern mounted in the United States that American leftists would operate as communist infiltrators and as spies expanding a Soviet agenda.
The extent to which communism has been directing our foreign policy, our suicidal foreign policy, if you please. And if the American people want more of that, then they can vote for the present administration.
This is Republican Senator Joseph McCarthy. He became a symbol of Red Scare in the 1950s when he conducted a highly publicized investigation of alleged communist infiltration of the U.S. government, army, and even civil society. Senator McCarthy's accusations were not proven true, but for years his rhetoric fed the fear of a communist takeover among the American public. He was later investigated and condemned by the Senate for conduct contrary to senatorial traditions. But McCarthy's legacy of an era of fear-mongering lived on. The term McCarthyism was coined as a political practice of making accusations of subversion or disloyalty without evidence, especially when related to communism. Unlike many European countries, a strong social democratic party has never materialized in the U.S. American-style capitalism has resulted in enormous wealth creation, and for years, capitalism was viewed as the only way to lead an American life. But the stark inequality that is rising again and that has been exacerbated by the pandemic has shown that capitalism is in crisis in the U.S., and that socialist programs that were once viewed as too radical are quickly becoming mainstream.